items on our agenda today after introductions. One is to go over some of the comments that we received back on the waiver for a group discussion, and the other is for Renee to present our communication plan. So we'll go through and do introductions first. Dave is on vacation. I don't know why he thinks he gets in each one, but there you go. So we won't be waiting on him. Maybe some other people will trickle in before we get done here, though. So I'm Kathy Nichols with the Division of Medical Assistance, and we'll go around this way.
I'm Deb Goda with the Division of Medical Assistance.
I'm Matt Potter, community advocate for the community and most members in the Stakeholder.
I'm Peg.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Nash.
I do, exactly. I am not John Nash. I'm Julia Adams-Short. I'm filling in for John today. John is also on vacation. I'm with the Art and Arts Direction.
I'm Melissa Barron, and I represent NCAR.
Beverly Moore, I'm a parent of a young adult with autism and board member of the Autism Society.
I'm Cheryl Zerby. I'm filling in for Bob Hedrick with NCPC.
Curtis Bass of the North Carolina Providers Association.
I'm Carrie Arp with the Adult with Disabilities Consortium.
I'm Dan Guy with DHHS Communications, supporting DMH and Medicaid.
Okay, just think about it then. Okay. And then let's go around the outside, too.
I'm Renee Rader with DMA.
I'm Mary Short, and this is my daughter Katie, and I just represent families with severe and profound disabilities.
Sarah Potter. I'm Matt Potter's mom.
Deanna Janis with Easter Seals UCP.
Vivian Leon with State Operated Healthcare Facilities.
William Williams, DMH DDSAS. Rose Burnett with Trillium Health Resources.
Avery Mazzaman with Cardinal Innovations. I'm Ellen Perry, and I'm a self-advocate.
I'm Lynn, I'm Ellen's assistant.
So, okay, so I hope everybody had a good summer. We have had, we had a very productive validation period at the end of July. And we don't have the results back from that yet, but we're quickly moving towards the end of the model creation. And so what's happening simultaneously with that, some of you, well, I don't guess anybody in here actually participated in that, but some of, like Bob did, for instance. So some of, unfortunately, none of them are here to tell you how it went from their perspective, but we did have active participation in that, and I think it was a good experience for those that did participate. As everybody knows, the waiver came down on the 7th, and so Deb is gonna, the purpose of today is to walk through
Some of the things that we needed group feedback on, that we wanted to get your opinion. Some of the comments were positive. Some of them were asking for clarifying questions. Some people didn't like some things. Some people loved others. So really what we wanted to do is bring some of the finer points to get your opinion on where we should go with them, if we should make a change, or if we are going to stay the course that we're on with that definition.
Okay, get on with it.
So I'm going to go by topic areas, and we did get a really robust feedback. We broke it out comment by comment, and we have almost 700 lines of comment because some people would submit 14 pages with 20 different comments on it. So we've pretty much got all of that logged out and what the response is and what changes need to be in the waiver. Thank you for looking at it, finding our typos and other things that we didn't think about. The first thing I want to bring up is we had more than one request to cover service and maintenance contracts for supplies and equipment assistive technology. People feel that it would behoove us to maintain the technology as opposed to getting new technology if it breaks. Discussion? Everybody agree with that?
I mostly agree, I think. I mean, to me, that's a case-by-case issue, because in some instances, there those pieces of equipment where getting a new piece could serve the person with less effectiveness. One, but technology really evolves very quickly, and so in a lot of cases there's a resistance to something newer because you're used to something older and you could be better served with something newer. So I don't know how I would feel about universally saying, let's maintain the current equipment rather than replacing it if it breaks, because I think there are some instances where the latter is actually the better option.
So if it wasn't a you must maintain this versus replacing this, and we made an option to have warranties covered, maybe cover it for, we're only going to be able to cover something for a year.
Right.
So put in the coverage, and with the caveat that if a newer piece of equipment, or if this piece of equipment cannot be repaired, it would be.
I think that.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that one? Okay. Community living and support. We got a lot of pros and cons on this. A lot of questions about the rate on it and whether or not the rate would be sufficient. One question we had was, could this service be provided in the direct support professional's home? Previously, respite in the current waiver, personal care and respite may be provided in the staff's home, but habilitation may not be. As this definition is blended, do we want to allow this to be done in staff homes?
Carrie's got a thought.
I think it's up to the individual discretion of what works with folks. I think we need to be very wary about the health and safety and what's really happening in those other people's homes. But I think in some cases, it absolutely makes sense.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Just have to be closely monitored, I think.
I mean, they're supposed to do it. Is that in the waiver, or do we just do that?
We have to do monthly monitoring right now.
There's a checklist, a safety
That's what I was
checklist that
wondering.
must be. So with monthly monitoring, the safety checklist, do you feel comfortable that this may be appropriate in some instances? What do you think?
Either one of you.
Either one of you.
I think definitely that there just has to be, if the team agrees on that piece of it, I do think that it may have to be, it needs to be carefully watched. We all know people take advantage of situations, and that's what we want to avoid as much as possible. But that's the problem in making the waiver more flexible, is you open up more opportunities. I have definitely learned in this year, there's no simple answer to anything. So, I just think I have a nephew who lives with me, has a disability, and sometimes I would be completely fine with that. There's other times, I want certain things done in the home, so it really, and it depends on the staff that's working with them.
And the goals, I would say,
Yeah.
too. What are the goals? What's the
Right,
intent of-
right, because sometimes they can be interactive and have a lot more social opportunities if they're engaging.
Once a month, how much more often can you check it?
So if
I think the key is it will truly being checked once a month.
The healthcare, the checklist has to be done once a year. It's required once a year.
and then the monitoring monthly. So if we say that the team must agree that it has to comport with the goals, it has to be in the plan, it has to be monitored monthly, it may be okay in some circumstances. Okay. Anybody have any other thoughts on that one?
Why don't we put in if the staff is taking their client, I would do it every 6 months.
The checklist?
Checklist. That would help. I mean, that would make parents feel a little bit better.
Okay. Anybody else on that? Okay. Thank Thank you. Okay, one of the components of community living and support is that natural supports living with the person can have some training to support the individual. One suggestion was that someone who is not living with the person can be trained, such as the neighbor who comes over to help with house repairs. Is this something that should be added to the definition or should be under natural supports education?
Didn't you already have that, we talked about that with the Girl Scout leaders, so would that be the same?
Is that under natural support?
Is it also?
Education.
Education?
Because it was previously only family members.
Okay, so natural supports education?
Can I ask that you guys speak up a little bit because all of this is going on outside so that we can hear it? You can probably shut that at this point if you want to, mind. People who are 15 minutes late, they're not allowed in or exclusive.
Or we'll ask them a question at the door that they have to answer again.
Innovations.
No.
For Community Navigator, we did get a lot of feedback that the name change from Community Guide to Community Navigator would not be necessary, that it would be confusion, that we would lose the hold on the progress we've made with the definition. Agree with that?
What? No funny.
The response was that people didn't want to change it to Community Navigator. They wanted to keep it as Community Guide.
We do a lot of that. Everyone's looking at us.
It's up to you, Julie.
I mean, I don't
No
see
way.
a reason why it needs to change per se. I mean, I think that there is some benefit to continuity. There are a lot of adjustments and changes coming in the new innovations waiver that families are going to have to be educated on and individuals to be educated on and possibly through that continuity could actually benefit people. So I can see where that would be confusing.
So this group was the one that wanted to change the name.
And the reason, just
Right.
what more people would use it, to really explain what it did more, but that's where I think.
To disassociate it because it did,
That had some negative.
so that you're right, so that this is a different.
And I think I can see this
Rebranding.
this group's
Yeah.
rebranding, but I'm not sure that that would translate well outside. I think
Well, that's why we kind of brought it back to you because it was this group's recommendation to begin with. So there's a thought. What are you going
and
to
I
do with
can
it?
see where the word navigator probably describes this service better.
No.
Makes it look more professional. Could lend to raising the standards in some ways on this. But if you're a parent advocate and you're learning all these new elements of the innovations waiver and going through that, plus all the other changes that are coming our way in the state, is that as critical to change that as it would be to help with parents?
I prefer Navigator. How many comments did you get that Navigator was a problem?
I could look up the exact number, at least a half a dozen,
Out of how many comments?
700.
700.
Thanks for playing.
I like it. I like Navigator too. Because Navigator means that you're
Guiding.
people are navigated through the system.
Yeah,
It helps. It makes sense
yeah, but we're talking about,
better than community guide. Community guide doesn't make any sense to me.
I mean, if we're talking about even 10 or 12 out of 700, that's a very small percent. I mean, I'm glad you brought it up, but, you know, I when you said that, I had assumed that it was
Yeah.
a larger percentage.
Yeah, exactly.
The question is, if you do change the name to Community Navigator, then people will be looking at something different about that than Community Guide. So what I would suggest is that there are things within the Community Guide definition that maybe you can explain or make a little bit clearer. And that might help with that change.
Would there be any benefit of calling it Community Navigator, formerly Community Guide, for like a year?
What is that, Prince?
Well,
Well, it helps to bridge the gap. I mean, I'm a communicator, we throw out ideas people don't like, but it would help bridge the gap and let folks know, give it some continuity, but also move it along to the different places you drop it.
We're not that stupid.
Well, the way you presented it, I think in the education, the way you did on the webinar, that's the way you had it. It said Community Navigator, formerly Community Guide, I believe, in the presentation, right?
So maybe we do it in the training
Community
portion
portion.
and then.
Yeah, I mean, it may not
Well,
necessarily be.
as long as the care coordinators are trained, those are the people that need to be trained to say formerly known as Community Guide.
And also the community guide needs to be trained too. To their, I mean, it's widened.
Families are used to name changes. I mean, gee, are we going to object? I didn't hear anybody object to changing it to community living. I hate the name community living, and I've said that over and over again. Why isn't it called home living? It takes place in the home, but you're not calling it home living. Why are you calling it community living? Oh, that's right, because you want outside staff to come in and do the job, so that way she's institutionalized in her own home. Oh, wait a minute, it's not her home, it's her community living.
So I think you get a vote on that.
Yeah.
Next.
Under assistance with guardianship, it was requested that we add established alternatives to guardianship.
Where is that?
It is, I think it is within the bulleted points of Community Navigator.
Say it again.
Instead of just saying assistance with guardianship, add or establishing alternatives to guardianship.
What does that mean?
It means that not only can you assist with guardianship, but you can assist somebody with getting a healthcare power of attorney if they don't need a guardian. You can help them find another resource.
It was the education around the types of guardianship.
Correct.
Yes.
Everybody good with that one? Under self-direction, it was asked here, the Community Navigator, not focus on, that this service not be self-directed, and that this service be a provider-directed service.
Community Navigator.
Community Navigator.
Yeah. I don't understand. Why?
That was the comment. It was recommended that it not be self-directed.
I find that a little odd. I mean, I think I understand the spirit of the comment in the sense that I know if I was doing Community Navigator services, I as a user of services, I would be looking to the Community Navigator to say like, okay, help me with this, or looking to the provider and say, okay, help me with this, because I have no idea where to begin, but I'm looking to get set up with the Community Navigator, so help me out there. So I understand it from that perspective. I do think that it should be provider-led from that perspective. That said, if someone who is self-directed, for example, specifically what they want out of, out of the Community Navigator service or whatnot, I see no reason why they shouldn't be able to guide the service. So, I'm a little confused as to that.
I am too.
I think it's because, sorry, if I could just clarify, I think it's because when you're self-directing a service, you are in essence the person who's supervising that service. So if you hire a community guide, if I ask Matt to be my community guide, how am I supervising him in this education and this information?
That makes it a little bit more sense.
So isn't it right now that you have to have a community guide if you're self-directed, right?
Yes.
And so it's kind of almost keeping the sense that you still have to have someone who's helping you navigate. That if you are self-directed, then and you choose community navigator.
No, you have to have.
Right. Well, but under the new, I don't know if that's a part of the new. Did we make sure they had to have it in the new?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just saying that part doesn't fall, just like it does right now, it doesn't really fall under the self-direction.
Got it.
So it's really keeping that the same,
Yeah.
which makes sense, I guess, that you would want that person.
So I still can choose my community guide, or my community navigator.
You can choose your community navigator, but you have to go through a provider agency for that community navigator.
And nobody's picking who that is for you. You still get to say, I like Cheryl. Out of those 3 people you brought in here, Cheryl's the one I like. And I want the other 2. You're still actually making the choice of the people they offer you. You're just not managing their timesheet or
That makes sense.
rate of pay or any of that sort of piece of the self-direction.
Okay.
But you ultimately still get to make the choice. You always have that choice regardless. To say, I don't like that worker, so you gotta go.
Clear.
Okay.
That's not clear. If we have to have this much discussion on explaining the question.
Yeah, it makes a lot more sense than
It was brought up that only having 1-month authorizations won't make this service sustainable. Do we want to put that it's a 6-month authorization, or do we want to still leave that open-ended?
Specific to Community Navigator.
Specific to Community Navigator.
Did we decide that it was 1 month, or was that just the way it was? And
That was
carried over?
that was the comment. The comment was that there are some places where it is being done for a very short period of time.
That makes
Well,
no sense.
why would it be done on the ice?
Because what the LMEMCOs tell you when you ask for community guide right now, oh, that's a 90-day service. And if you ask at your ISP that you want it for the full plan year, you have to pull out the waiver and show them where community guide in the waiver is more than a 90-day service. Community guide as a B3 service is 90 days.
I know Cardinal has 4 whole years.
Yeah, I would imagine why that would be under innovations waiver, B3 told the ball game.
Yep.
Not on the table here for discussion. I don't know why it wouldn't be based on your ISP. I mean, that's annual. Why would, I didn't think we did anything about changing authorization timeframes or payment methodology. We didn't discuss any of that in this group. We didn't make those changes.
To clarify your answer,
Content.
it's B3 versus innovations.
And B3's capitated, so
Yep. Yep.
it makes sense that it would be 90 days.
Exactly.
They may have to cut off in the middle of the relationship.
There is also a suggestion that the service be broken into community guide for self-direction and community guide for other.
Nah.
I just wanted to let you know that they came up. I don't know if anybody would really want to parse out the definition
What would
that
the
much.
difference be?
One would be probably,
I get the difference in population, but what would the difference in the service range?
I think it probably breaks down more on the rate side than it does on
Well, we need it to be more complicated.
You want it to be more complicated?
No, I want it to be easier, but that's what you're all making it.
Yeah.
That comment is making it more complicated.
Agreed. So,
I feel like that's just making things different for the sake of making them different.
those were the main points for Community Navigator. For community networking, there was a comment on volunteering and how the person who was commenting didn't agree that we should limit volunteering to places where people traditionally volunteer.
Where else are they going to
Does it say that?
The example is somebody volunteers at a floral shop because they like flowers,
Oh, as opposed to.
as opposed to
Like
being paid.
Like a habitat for
The issue is whether or not the place you're volunteering is going to get into issues with violation of labor laws.
Right.
Because they're allowing you to volunteer for work they pay, otherwise would pay someone to do.
Right, and
That's not really a definition issue, that's a labor law issue for the place you're volunteering.
There are some other cans of worms that could be open too, because if we're talking about a place where people traditionally volunteer under, this particular context, then there's probably a little bit of, history with that place as well, where it's like, there's a level of trust or whatnot, whereas if you just said, okay, you can volunteer anywhere, then you might not know what you're getting yourself into a little bit, and the people running the place where these people are volunteering might not know the particular situation as well. I'm kind of two minds in that situation. I understand the spirit of the thing, but I don't know if it would actually work.
I can see how an individual could get exploited in that, where they should be paid because they are doing work that is of value in that sense.
And that's why we put the
Right.
examples
Yeah.
in.
I mean, even if it's just sweeping up those leaves at the florist shop, somebody else would get paid to do that.
Exactly.
And you're not getting paid because you can do it as a volunteer to have an opportunity to do something.
Right, and you can get into a lot of problems with people who might then say, well, then you're taking a job from me because they really had a higher rate before.
Well, I'm also thinking safety and safety issues around the training of the individuals who work with a volunteer. Normal standard places, there's background checks for working in volunteer situations. If you're volunteering at a school, you go through a background check. I see this, especially with the politics of the state of North Carolina, looking at a lot of employee misclassification right now of this group of individuals getting swept up into some of those concerns also.
So we will leave that you must volunteer in, yes.
I mean, I think it's taking a big step, you could be able to volunteer, and, it's incorporating that in there, so.
We have that language somewhere, because it's work employment definition
Yeah.
is in there.
If there are other places that people want to volunteer, can't the state give them permission?
You mean if there's an exception?
Yeah.
The state doesn't govern that, and I think that
Well-
does bring a good point, though, because I could see people, a care coordinator or somebody saying, well, that's not traditional location for
It's not
volunteer.
the care coordinator's call.
Or whoever,
The
you
care
know what I mean? I
coordination,
could see
yeah.
an education component there, around what is tradition versus labor
Excuse me.
laws.
Okay, so we'll put that in the educational component as well to make sure that that's considered.
Typical people might volunteer in non-traditional places, so aren't we putting a limitation on people with disabilities, that an additional layer of limitation rather than just letting the labor laws go?
But I wouldn't typically volunteer at a for-profit business sweeping up flowers, you know what I'm saying?
Yes, although students volunteer at publishing companies and all
Well,
kinds
those
of.
are internships.
Well, that's about, they're not paid, many times not paid, is that not a volunteer?
But we cover.
It's a labor law issue,
Yes.
so I'm just saying, the question is, are we adding another limitation rather than just let the normal
Well, I would think
rules
that
govern?
if it was an internship with a career goal assessed with it, so if you're in high school and you're doing an internship program, or you are in college, or community college, or a skills building, and you are doing internship, there is a career component attached to it and a goal platform attached to it that is moving you into something else. Many of us did internships in high school and college that got us into I think that, right, I think that is difficult.
That's how you got into it.
Right, I think that in some ways is different from when you hear the word volunteering. When you think about volunteering, you think volunteering in a soup kitchen, you think volunteering at the library, you think volunteering at Habitat for Humanity, it's volunteering at your church. Well, there you're a page, and it is part of your academic curriculum.
Anyway,
Right,
that was just my,
yeah,
that was
yeah,
just my
yeah.
thought.
So the Project Search grants that DDTI did, not DDTI, the DD Council did, are internship pathways for people where those exist. But they're career path oriented. But they are in settings that are non-traditional internship. I mean, that's a good example of something in the system today. And those people could be on the innovations waiver, receiving probably some service to support them through that. I doubt it's speedy networking.
Yeah, wouldn't that be more supported employment?
It might be, I'm not sure. I mean, they're high school kids, they're not adults.
I've always considered an internship and a volunteer position two completely different things. And I say that as someone who did intern for a summer in Washington, D.C. The other key difference with something to actual internship is that there's a time frame. Whereas with this and what we've been talking about, I get the impression that it was always just, something that the person did with no particular time frame or no expected, goal or anything. It's just they're volunteering to keep busy or to, do it because they enjoy it or whatever. And that's all well and good, and there's absolutely a place for it. But it's very different from something that's more career oriented, for sure.
Okay, so we leave the language in and then we look at internships either under this definition with goal platform and time limit or under supported employment, whichever one the waiver guidance lets us put it in best.
Surprised we didn't catch that the first go around.
Well, I think it's because we're granted just the
interesting.
we volunteer in normal places, and I don't think we pushed it out that far.
Yeah, interesting.
Someone also brought up we should clarify that this also includes post-secondary opportunities at the university.
Anything pushes for more.
I volunteered for 1 week at the Century Center and got a job. For 1 solid week, I volunteered, and so that is a good way for a person to get a job too. And it was an untraditional place. So I would be if I needed staff to go with me, I couldn't do it. Or community networking or anything.
So they'll have to look at those volunteer opportunities very closely.
Yeah, and I would definitely encourage there to be some sort of let's say a person who really wanted to work, somebody that technically would fall under parts of what's considered, traditional or whatever. Just like with anything, I would very much encourage that there be some sort of appeal process or something. If somebody was told you can't do that, there should at least be some avenue.
Well, there'd be a grievance. You could grieve that.
Well, and if it was put in as a service request and the service was denied, it would be an appeal. So yes.
Because there definitely needs to be, at least the positive. Because we talk about flexibility, and that was a huge part of our whole basis here, what we've been trying to do for the past year, or however long it's been.
Almost a year.
And so I really think in the spirit of that flexibility, there should definitely be at least potential, exceptions to that.
If people are already doing the non-traditional kind of volunteerism, can they continue, can they be grandfathered in?
We didn't look at that as grandfathering in, because once you get into wage and hour, you get into the wage laws, and you get into potential exploitation. So it would have to be looked at when it comes back up. It would have to be looked at anew.
Well, I'm
Case by
very
case.
concerned about a few of our participants at the ORC, that the ORC has put them in places that are untraditional. So that's what I'm very concerned about.
I will say this, I do have very strong feelings about people not being exploited. And recently I have been sort of been almost like my number one cause is people with disabilities in particular being valued for the work that they're doing, the way that they should be valued for the work that they're doing. And I think culturally there has been, and there still is, this idea that if somebody with a disability is there doing work, then, they should just be grateful to be there, and, there's no other compensation needed. And obviously not all volunteerism is exploitative. There absolutely is legitimate volunteerism, but I also do think that sometimes it gets used as a crutch to exploit people. So I do definitely appreciate that the spirit of the thing is to try to dissuade from situations like that, because I do believe that it does happen.
Wow.
Well, I would think that some of what she was explaining might get picked up in job exploration under supported employment.
Possible. I'll look at the definitions.
So if you're looking at volunteering someplace to see it as a job that you would like to maybe move from, 1 or 2 weeks of checking it out to actually interning and beginning that program, that would be different from that would be. And that's what Ellen was addressing. Is that what you're addressing?
I was that's what happened with me.
So you went into a place as a volunteer.
I volunteered at the Century Center for 1 whole week, and then they hired me.
Right.
But that was an unusual thing back 15 years ago.
Right, but that's what we're saying is a lot of schools also do that. If you look at how schools work, they may send a child out during the school year, during their junior, senior of high school, to basically shadow certain jobs or volunteer certain jobs to see if they have an interest in pursuing something along those career routes, which sounds like what you did.
Well,
You volunteered for a week and then you got hired.
I wasn't expecting to get hired.
Right, but the end result was because you took that opportunity.
They loved me.
In supported employment, we call it job shadowing.
Right.
When you look at something, you try it out to see if you're capable of doing
But
the
that's
job.
supported employment.
Right.
That's part of supported employment.
Well, we're not saying they can't volunteer whatever they want to, we're just saying that you can't build community networking while you're doing it.
Right.
Bingo.
In those settings, so we're not saying people can't volunteer wherever they want to.
Yeah.
Right.
Just be clear about that, we're just saying community network doesn't pay for support while you do it.
Thank you very much.
But I think we're good.
So then, primary crisis
Precise.
response, a lot of questions around what do we consider to be access to a licensed psychologist, psychiatrist. So, under contract, on staff.
That's a network question, honestly, to me, Carol, if you have feedback on that.
Yeah.
I think that you hear about psychiatry and you hear, obviously it's important to have access to a psychiatrist. We had, what is his name, I just forgot, on our committee, who, most of the folks that we work with have access to. Do we have a formal paid contract with them? No. You know what I mean? So I think
But if
that's
you
a
need
fine
them, you can
line.
get them.
Right, and then a lot of the IDD providers, there's no way they're going to be able to afford it.
Right, yeah, on staff
Just,
just.
so when you think about network,
Yeah, no, that's definitely
right, it's a network question, and it should be addressed in the crisis plan also. And maybe that needs to be in there, because I don't think that was.
And even for non-crisis situations, even just like general mental health upkeep kind of thing, it's definitely a problem for people who try to access, those services, but that's not something that would be addressed in the waiver. That's something else.
Okay, thank you. Day supports, two major points. Again, it's transportation is at the responsibility of the day supports provider. Some people wanted to know if they could have a written agreement with the residential provider that the residential provider would provide the services. Others just wanted the residential provider to provide the transportation to the day program. We are still in agreement that day supports is a component, transportation is a component of day supports.
That's what we said.
Well, I always have problems.
And they said, shh.
Yeah, we would talk about it another time, and we never really talked about that.
Right.
So I'm going to still stand up for that one, is that, because we have people who live in other counties, who then we are responsible for transporting in. And that's a long way, a lot of time, that we aren't able to bill for as providers. And it is difficult to have that expectation to say we have to transport somebody 45 minutes each way. That's not a part, and I know you said there's some built-in stuff to the definition for transportation, but I will argue, when that rate was set 15 years ago, transportation
Well, I think
costs
that's
again.
where it comes back to, that might be a rate increase on that client with that MCO.
Especially if there's not an access in the
Right,
county.
right. And so the issue is going back to that MCO and saying, whoever it is chooses to come to our thing, we're the only thing there is to come to, but the cost of that exceeds this formulary that was in the original cost modeling. And here's the evidence, MCO, that it's costing me $10 more a day, an hour, whatever it is. And they should honor that. I mean, that
Our
should honor
providers
that.
go,
Well, and if they don't, then that's when I guess you call them.
we have a lot of residential providers, and ours
We
go,
do
I
that.
mean,
But that's you all working together, or if somebody
or
has.
they reimburse the residential provider for providing the transportation. The day program.
The day program.
But that becomes a very costly situation, and I think that we're looking at providers who are already have a lot of other things that are added on them that aren't really being covered, and it's just asked to be doing more and more. The transportation, the fact that time cannot count during transportation, we can't, count their time, and that I think people would be more likely willing to do it if we could count time, bill for the time that we're providing transportation, because we're still providing services during that time. We're still responsible for those individuals during those times. I'm still paying staff during that time. That's what the feedback from my group would be.
Yeah, I will say, I've never understood this idea that transportation, and this is not just true in this particular arena, it's true in a lot of professional situations where transportation doesn't count, as far as like hours are concerned. And I've never really understood that because you're still putting in the investment and whatnot. However, I can see where that might become difficult, and there are ways that could potentially be exploited. So it's kind of like, I get it, but ideally we would eventually come to a situation where what Melissa was talking about would eventually happen.
I don't think that's going to happen right now.
That can be on the short list for...
Right, I don't think we're going to have time to address that between now and January 1st. Obviously it would at least have to be a differential rate, but
Yeah, so one of the things I think that gets real confusing when we say something is calculated in the rate is because we don't do cost finding anymore, and we don't do cost modeling. And so for folks that haven't been in the system or didn't do those kinds of activities, we haven't done that since we privatized the system. That's an old area program, not across the board anyway, certainly not in the innovations waiver, to really help people understand what does it mean when we say it's calculated in the rate. What does that mean? Because what it means is if we took it out of the rate, day support's rate would drop, and we would pay that money to a transportation vendor. And so then you'd really see how much you had been getting paid across the board for transportation if we removed it, right, from the rate structure. And so I think that is where, that's the part that doesn't make sense to everybody in the system around what does that mean when you say it's factored into
And we
the
could
rate?
take a look at that maybe as an educational piece as well, just how we did cost model it back in the day. but-
That's an old thing. That's not,
Because it may
that's
not
not
be-
been done on day support.
Well, and it may
Ms.
not
Cardinal did it, I think.
be, it may not be up to date,
It's not.
even if we did, so.
Right, right.
But, yeah, so we can, I think we definitely need to flag that, but I don't think we're gonna get that done by January,
No.
so.
I mean, that goes back to that whole part of this discussion where
Which I guess I
talk
gave you
about-
the same answer David
We
did.
did talk about rates,
She
we
gave
did talk
me a
about
few more
rate payment
minutes.
methodologies, and you know this. That's a rate payment methodology, that's not a content of the definition.
Right,
Part of the discussion.
right, and,
I don't think there's anything wrong with flagging stuff.
This is on the wish list.
I had a concern, and I hadn't really paid attention to it before, but since it looks like Katie's going to be living somewhere else, in that day support service definition, there isn't any sort of a sentence that describes personal assistance as necessary. Katie can't get her lunch out of the refrigerator and set it out in front of her to eat. So there's just nothing in that definition about day supports that includes those sort of personal care activities that are incidental to the provision of day supports. So I think that needs to be included. There are a lot of very severe and profound individuals sitting in day support programs, and I just would like to see that written.
It's done, but maybe it's just done, it's not, it's one of those unwritten things that we do because they're in our services. Just the same thing with somebody needs assistance in the bathroom. You know, you don't stop because you can't provide personal care in a facility either, so you don't say that you're stopping habilitative time here to help somebody in a bathroom.
Well,
Which
but
can take some time, but so it is kind of, and maybe that's kind of that piece of, and how we combined under, I can't think of it, is community living, the combination, that it's really kind of inherent. It always has been.
Yeah, the day hab allows for it. It was in the CAP MR
Yeah.
definition, and waiver guidance allows for the incidental. So, yes.
yeah.
Is that something?
Yeah.
but I think it should be specifically included. I mean, it can be a reason that Katie isn't allowed to participate in certain programs because of the assistance that she requires.
I would see that really much as the difference between day supports individual and day supports group and how it's defined in the ISP of the person. I mean, I don't disagree that we just add a sentence in the definition about it, but I mean, really what it comes down to is whether it's group if it's incidental and it's individual if it's 100% of the time, because you just don't know when they're going to need what kind of, one-on-one support. Because you can't really be a member of a group if suddenly you're going to have one-on-one support, because what happens to the other group members? I mean,
The work that you in,
yeah.
I mean, yes, that,
No, I get it, but I think it really comes down to how that gets defined in the person's ISP about whether it is an incidental support or whether it is you've got to have this kind of one-on-one to be in the program.
So we're good with the statement, and we're good with saying that this needs to be outlined in the ISP.
I mean, to what extent that one-on-one is versus group. I mean, if somebody has to be fed, that's one-on-one. If somebody has to have personal hygiene in the bathroom, that's probably one-on-one, because you don't know when the bathroom's going to happen. It's all the time. So, that I think is generally how we define that in our day support services on both sides, care coordination and.
Okay, I am going to move us along so that Renee gets a chance at the end of this all. There was a recommendation that we put it. You might get it. You might have to come back again. a recommendation that we add to the home modification definition that the home to be modified as a single home recognized by Medicaid as the individual's residence.
So if somebody's a beach house and they need a modification.
Is that signed by attorney at law?
That was the request.
There's divorced parents though, and you share custody.
Yeah.
Then I may need assistance in my home and the other home if we have.
Going anti the direction you're trying to go.
Yeah, definitely.
Do it.
Yeah.
Okay?
That was probably NCO.
Yes,
right
no?
there.
Would that include a duplex?
I'm sorry,
Does it mean a single home or single family home?
Oh, it's the single, it's where you live. If you live in a duplex and you own that side of the duplex, then,
Okay, so it's not talking about that.
But we're getting rid of that suggestion right now.
yes, it's gone.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
but you mentioned 2 main points under day supports, and I got transportation, but I wasn't sure what the.
Oh,
second
it was transportation. We don't want it included in transportation. We want the residential supports to include
Okay,
it.
so it was both around.
So 2 transportation.
2 transportation. Let's see.
So much for me.
There was a recommendation that under the plan development that there be timeframes for submitting urgent and emergent requests.
How do we, there's already a time frame for urgent and emergent.
For the care coordinator to submit it instead of not just them processing it. How
So
quickly
they
the
have to
plan
get it
gets
in
it.
within 72 hours?
It says immediately for urgent, 7 days for emergent, and routine for 30. For any service, it didn't call out.
Let's not,
What is the goal of
I don't quite follow this either. I mean, I understand, okay, how fast they submit it versus how fast it's processed.
I think it was a concern over Matt needs a home modification and because your ramp collapsed and
Well, why are you-
30 or 40. He's sitting next to me. If Dan was sitting next to me, Dan needs a home modification because his ramp collapsed.
I have a suggestion.
Yes.
If you're going to consider at all adding that to the waiver, that truly is a performance indicator.
Yeah.
If it needs to be added, it shouldn't be added to the text in Appendix D. It should be listed as a performance indicator so you in fact could measure
Under.
whatever the performance of the MCO would be.
But also, you can't have a word like immediately.
Yeah.
It's specify
Yeah, but
if it's 24 hours or whatever, but you can't, immediately is too amorphous.
Yes.
The advantage of doing it as a performance indicator is you actually have to have a numerator and a denominator, and it has to be very measurable.
yeah, I like the idea of putting it as a performance indicator. It's just when we were talking about, it kind of happens to the actual paper. I was like, I know what these words mean put together, but I don't really know what they mean in this particular.
But I don't think it means what you think it means.
Exactly.
Okay. Next one. Relative is provider. There was clarification requested about defining all individuals residing in the home, including all individuals residing in the home instead of just relatives. So if dad's girlfriend was providing service, or if the sister to a minor child was providing service.
We identify who exactly is the service providers.
Yeah, currently it's a parent, adoptive parent, step-parent residing in the home of an adult, not a child. So, legal guardians of a minor child cannot be reimbursed for service. So in this instance, can you have the older sister to a minor child be paid as a provider?
Not if they're not currently doing it. The guardianship statute said you have to already be doing it. If you're not the parent, you don't get to come on and suddenly ask to be paid as a relative. The guardianship statute says if you aren't already
The guardian.
right.
I meant legally responsible person. So my child needs support. Can her older brother, who's 18, provide the service when I can't because she's 5? So there was questions as to should that be added in? Should anyone living in the home of a minor child be allowed to provide service?
Yes.
Okay.
And you're saying under relative as a provider, because I thought relative as a provider only applied to adults, not children.
It does. It excludes, but this is the section that the comment came in. Yeah, got this.
You have to check the children box for relative as a provider to apply.
And it is checked yes on the draft waiver that was sent out.
Yes, and that will be corrected.
Yeah.
But
I didn't object to that.
But that wouldn't fall into it either because it wouldn't
Right.
be the older brother wouldn't be a legally responsible person.
Correct.
So the question is, do we include that, or do you feel that it's okay for the older brother to provide services?
He's not a legally responsible relative.
An adult living in the home.
See, I
I
struggle.
mean, I think that happens a lot in the system right now.
Yeah.
And I think if what you're suggesting would cause a family to potentially lose a staff member, right, which is going the opposite direction of what we had talked about. Because if you say yes to this comment, then now the person hired has to be someone outside the home. It might be the cousin, but they can't live in the house.
Okay. What about the situation where it's kind of a remote location?
Well, that's why I brought it.
The staff that you just lost.
Because someone suggested adding that, and I'm just making sure that that's not something
I mean,
anybody
they're
here
still
would
working
consider.
for a provider agency that's
Correct.
overseeing the service delivery.
Right, but why should it be biased against like an older sibling who qualifies otherwise just because they're not in the home?
Because they're living in the home.
Right. I don't
So if they move out, they can be the worker, but if
Yeah,
they
that
live there, they
doesn't-
can't.
that doesn't
I think we've got an answer on this one.
No.
Do it. No. Got it.
And unless we're trying to limit who can deliver services.
Which, I think,
Not a good idea. Okay.
We are just saying that parents can continue not to be the provider of
Minor children.
But I take exception to that, but I'll.
And so do I.
So we'll put that.
And I
on
know
the list
lots
for
of-
I mean, I don't understand what the difference, honestly. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a position, a judgment position of the system.
Because CMS
Many
allows it.
parents can't work because of their children's issues.
Correct.
And yet they are excluded from being allowed to provide those services, even though they would do that under the same provider organization every other worker does. Same
Or
governance
why-
Structure, same supervision, monitoring by QP and all that, they're restricted. I don't agree with that.
Or why not limit them to backup staff? If you're
Yeah,
working
yeah.
and the worker doesn't show up or the worker quit and you gotta find a new worker, so now I can't go to work, so now what? We're living at the homeless shelter?
Just saying,
Okay.
I think it's a systems judgment.
Yeah, but how's that different from any other parent with a sick child who has to stay home from work because their kid isn't home?
Yeah, that's the judgment of the system.
Well, it's probably the fact, like this summer I spent working days at home every week because I didn't have staffing.
But if you had a minor child and you didn't have a babysitter, you would be stuck with the same thing.
I think it's a little disingenuous to suggest that it's the same thing, given the populations that we're talking about. I think it's a little disingenuous to say that the strain on a parent of a child with any kind of special need, even if it's not severe and profound, isn't a little bit more intensive than, say, the parent of a child who is typical. It's the same thing. I mean,
So we're not really talking about this right now, right? Cindy was just mentioning that she wasn't going to talk
Just
about
making a
it.
statement, I wasn't trying to open it up. I know we already said no.
Put that on that list.
Fight for another day.
And who would we take that fight to, Cindy?
Don't ask me.
Is that a legislative decision we should?
That all depends on what happens with Medicaid reform.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
I mean, that's an honest answer to your question. Normally,
Right there is the one you
we've already argued this point. We continue to argue this point. To your favor. But really, honestly, and truly, as it stands right now, you could take it to the legislature, to their joint legislative oversight on HHS, and get them involved, which is how many of us have been doing it. If Medicaid reform is passed and the division of Medicaid, or the new DOM, is established, then as we are understanding it currently, DOM would be the individuals who would be able to make those adjustments with the insight of the legislature. So it would be a different process depending on what happens in the next 3 weeks.
But for the purpose of the next hour.
Yeah.
Okay.
But to answer the question.
Right.
There you go.
Thank you. Under residential support.
Wait, is that all we're going to discuss about the relative as provider? You didn't receive other comments?
That is actually, we received a lot of comments in favor and against relative as provider, eliminating relative as provider. Some people thought the 40 hours a week with the MCO not having to approve the first 40 was great. A lot of people wanted to know when the grandfathering would end for relatives, and we have not put it for relatives to provide more than 56 hours a week, and we did not put an end date on that.
You don't have an end date on your grandfather clause?
No. The waiver ends in 2 years.
Oh.
So it would end, ostensibly it would end then.
It would have to be written into the new waiver.
It'd probably be a good idea to specify that it ends when the waiver, unless otherwise adopted. Otherwise, some people might not, It's always good to specify. Especially when something might be disappearing.
Well, the new waiver would say the limit's 40.
Right.
And people will comment, what about the 16 over that?
I was grandfather for,
Well, grandfather did, so.
Yeah.
Not 40.
Can I ask a question? Is it 5 years or 2 years?
It's a 5-year waiver, but the waiver, we're in year 3 of the waiver right now.
this is an amendment, it's not a new waiver.
Okay, so in 2 years, so in a couple of years, we're going to be back here.
Yes, we will be back here in
Woohoo!
less than 2 years to do this all again.
Writing them for the new, right?
Don't threaten me with a good time.
Oh, well, you know what?
We still don't know why there's no.
We know where everybody lives.
Well, you know where I live.
At least no.
Okay, so a question on residential supports and vehicle modifications. A couple of people asked, why can someone who owns a vehicle who lives in a residential setting not own that vehicle and have it modified? Because they are excluded from having a vehicle modification.
If they live in a residential.
Because you get residential support, you can't get a vehicle modification.
Oh, that's interesting.
They own
Live
the
in
vehicle.
residential that drives a car that needs it? Is there
You
such a
don't
person out there?
necessarily have to be able to drive the car.
Correct.
You can own a car.
But I own it,
Yeah,
so
but,
I
what's
can get
the
somebody to
purpose of
take me
even
where I want to go when
dealing
I
with
want to
that?
go.
I mean, the residence itself will have a vehicle.
But that's
Why
for
would
6
the-
other people, so maybe I want to
Yeah.
have my own vehicle, my family has
Yeah.
purchased one for me, so my staff could drive it,
Yeah.
but, so I can get to the places I want to go when I want to go.
There's
It would have to be owned by that
There's
individual.
definitely a reason for it. For sure.
Not many people would fall into the
It's
category.
a pretty minor category.
It might be, but that doesn't mean that it should.
Yeah, but there's a lot of room right there for abuse.
I don't see how.
How so?
How?
Because you just say, I need this, this, and this, and have supply a big bill for what needs to get done and,
Well, I mean,
and if it's only for one person, I mean, the group home has a modified vehicle.
well, I mean,
We-
But some people live in ASA
Yeah.
or the old residential support.
Correct.
We have a couple people who are under a vehicle.
Jeez.
It would actually give them a lot more opportunities to find different AFL homes.
So maybe the statement should really reflect that if you have to own the vehicle.
Yes.
Right? It doesn't matter if you get residential or you don't, as long as you own the vehicle. So if the group home owns the vehicle, then no, but if you own it, the title's in your name or the legal representative.
Your guardian, right?
Then
God.
that's all.
How mean.
Besides, if you didn't add something like that in there, then the inference is, even if you legally own something, just because you happen to have a special need or happen to be a person with a disability, the inference is you can't modify this thing that you legally own just because we say you can't, which the implications of that are extremely problematic to me. So as long as the person owns the vehicle, go pass.
Okay,
Wow.
thank you. Specialized consultation, it was recommended that it be removed from the self-directed list.
Again, huh? Who is
In the same
after?
spirit as community networking. So to self-direct your own specialized consultation. I've decided I want Dan to come out and train me on my wheelchair.
I'm sorry, I don't know what this is.
Yeah, you're not making sense to me either.
Specialized consultation is on the list of waiver services that can be self-directed. So you would be overseeing that service.
Okay.
So you could hire someone to provide your respite services.
Okay.
And you would oversee their work, you would be their employer.
So this is like the community guide conversation.
Yes, this is specialized consultation where you're finding a licensed professional to do a service.
So I might want an OT to come out and do an evaluation for my home modification. I couldn't decide who that OT was going to be, decide what.
You would decide who it was through,
Just like,
yeah, you can do that now as an independent practitioner.
So.
It should be self-directed.
Make sure they're paid, that type of thing.
It doesn't make a whole lot of sense that it's in there.
Wouldn't it be the same answer as we just gave?
Yes.
Yeah.
She's like asking a trick question.
I'm making sure everybody gets their, I'm trying to make sure you get your money's worth out of this meeting because you're going to see us for a little bit.
She's not going to want to if you keep that up.
You're on our toes.
Are you taking it out? Are you taking it out?
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
You're making sure we're paying attention.
You're not removing.
Now, there was a question about supported living. They wanted to, we had said that this had to be the individual's home. It was not the provider's home. There was a question as to whether or not the provider could co-sign the lease if the person didn't have the credit to get the apartment.
Ooh. It's murky situation right there.
No.
I'm making sure that I am not denying access to anything on my own.
Oh, my.
There was a question as to supported living where we say that you're not residing with a family member, but the question was, what if it's your spouse or your child? So I think that we need to put spousal language in there because two people may want to live together.
I said it first.
And a child would not count in regards to the statute. It only talks about adults in the home, not children. So we'll make that language change if you're in agreement.
No question.
Do you have to get married, or could you live together?
You can live
like
together.
as partners?
You can live together as partners. You can have 3 people living in the home.
They still get that service?
Support the supported living, yes.
Because you don't have to have, and the thing is,
As long as
the trick
you're
is that when it's
Or
3
rented.
people, if there's a living. If you have 3 people living, say your adult child becomes 18 technically, and he's still in high school and still living with you, they wouldn't have to get kicked out if you have just drop-in supports. It's when you have to have a living person that they would interfere with the third person.
There will have to be some planning, or there will have to be some statutory changes. That was the primary questions that were up for debate, the things that you felt really strongly on.
On supported living,
Yes.
there is an exclusion for relatives to provide that service. And I don't understand why, if under the relative as direct service employee section of the waiver, it only addresses relatives who are living in the home. So if an individual is receiving supported living, why couldn't a relative who's not living in that home provide the supported living? And I think you probably know, I'm aware of a particular case where a family was getting ready to set their adult daughter up in an apartment, and the mom and a brother who's out on his own, they were getting, and they do use outside staff now in the home, and so this transition was going to occur with mom doing some, she thought, PC and skill building, and then backing away as more staff came on board, but brother was going to remain as permanent staff in a way so that he could watch the unrelated staff and just to have eyes on the situation. But the way the service definition is written, it excludes family from providing supported living. So why, or if we're not going to take it out, can we modify it so that there is some transitional language to it? But again, that brother, because mom and stepdad are, in their 70s, close to 80. So brother is going to be legal guardian, but he won't, and he's always provided some level of services, just so what.
They're not living in the same home.
No, they're transitioning her to her own apartment, and so they thought she was going to have PC and skill building.
Like you couldn't do supported living on your adult child as long as they were in your home. But if they moved out of your home, then
In that definition, it says that your parents are not your providers, your relatives are not your providers.
as in supported living.
Why? I mean, why not the transitional language or the backup staffing language?
I think that you do.
Because aren't people who currently live alone getting PC and skill
They
building?
can get community living and supports.
It doesn't say that in the waiver.
If they don't need the daily rate, 24 hours supported living, they can use the community living and support.
They could use other combinations, just not the day rate supervisor.
So maybe just need to clarify that.
Yeah.
So they're still able to be involved forever, just not under that one specific service definition.
And that was something that, as I recall, as we were going through this whole process, we found ourselves there a lot where you would say, oh, well, this definition doesn't cover this. And then we'd have to remind ourselves, yeah, but this other definition here, this doesn't. So I think that's an important thing, especially from an education standpoint, to say to people,
But
that knowing that curriculum is exhaustive, and there's a lot of whatever you might.
But that doesn't make any sense. Under community living, an individual can get 16 or 24 hours if they need it. So if you're living in your own place, So every 90 days, you're going to have to get that reauthorized, or every 6 months, rather than doing the supported living. I mean, I'm just not understanding.
Guidelines in that definition, wouldn't it, though? I mean, the MCO would decide based on the authorization, they could do it a year on ISP for community living too.
For community living, for the extension, I think we said it was 90 if you needed more than 16 hours a day of the service. The question would be if
Say
you
how
live.
long it could be authorized, though. It couldn't be a year.
I don't think we had in the definition that
Yeah,
you could
you can't
authorize
get
up
it,
to
no.
24 hours a day for a year.
Because we're going to resolve your need for 24-hour care
But if
in
you-
90 days.
But if you need a per diem and you needed that 24 hours, then why would you not use supported living?
But if you're not going to allow the parents and the brother to do it,
The issue is the limitation on who can provide it.
they're not living with the person.
Personal care.
And they
would be
can't be
service under
backup
care.
staff? I mean, it just,
In your scenario, though, the brother was just monitoring whether he.
no, he performs, there are some things that the brother does and he has done, and she wants her brother to do certain things with her. I believe he's doing some community networking with her. But it's very specific, and it's not a huge number of hours whatsoever. And again, it's different when staff is turning someone over to other staff, if there's a shift change. It's a different relationship when staff is turning the individual back over to relatives.
So in this instance, it would be, you can allow for X amount of time to transition from a family member providing service to.
But why, I mean, I just don't understand why it's in there. What do you care? They're not living with the individual.
You're saying, why does it matter who does the supported living? Is that what you're saying?
Right. Why does it matter?
I think we did that because people were moving out on their own, and it was to be independent and not to have people just moving to a new house and saying, this is a different residence, and the parents move in, and now it's still the family living together.
Yeah, it's just.
The parents aren't moving in with her.
Not in this situation, but I think that's why we talked about the definition being.
I think the spirit of the thing is probably because there are some instances where the individual receiving service wants to distance themselves from the family, not because they're estranged from the family or anything, but just because, they want to feel like they're out and living their life. And I feel like that's more of an issue that wouldn't really be as existent on the severe and profound, end of the spectrum. But the problem is that if we include the language that allows for that to happen, then in theory I could see it becoming sort of an issue of contention in the situation where the person receiving services wants to live more independently, but the family doesn't necessarily want that to happen, and then it could become a whole messy situation where
Well, it doesn't even allow if, let's say this young woman suddenly develops a medical problem and has to go into the hospital for a week and then has a 3-week recovery. So she's in the hospital for a week and her staff goes back to the agency and says, hey, I can't live without a paycheck for a week. Send me somewhere else. So they go to another place to work. And now she comes home from the hospital and that staff isn't coming back. So the parents or the brother aren't even allowed to be the backup staff until we find new staff. So it's okay for the parents and the brother to be volunteers and natural supports, but it's not okay for them to be, I mean, it's just, I don't understand this.
So you're asking that basically, and is this something that we want to change, do we want to allow a relative to provide supported employment? Supported living, sorry,
Even if it's only.
As backup staff.
as backup staff.
At a minimum, it's backup staff. I mean, you know,
So-
because otherwise the person just has to move back home.
Do we have major heartburn about that? Are we okay with that? What do you think about that?
I think backup is fine, personally.
I mean, if you want to call them out as committing Medicaid fraud, well then, call them out as committing Medicaid fraud. Prosecute if you think something is going on.
It's fine. Any other thoughts from the group?
God.
As backup staff?
Is there a time limitation?
On how long the backup staff, the transition?
I think it should be limited.
Why?
Because I think the whole
You
concept
seem to
of
think that people-
independent existence, not having their family come in when it's convenient for their family or to have some link. I think it's important that this person have an independent existence. And if you're going to use them for backup staff when there's a scenario, then there should be a cap on how long, and then they can petition for an extension if they need it. Otherwise, you're going to end up having the parents or the brothers there constantly.
So what would the limit look like now?
I think it would be I think what would be fair is a 30-day, you can always, as you say, ask for an extension is what I think you use, an extension, but there needs to be evidence that work has been done. Yeah, like you're saying, the provider agency's got to get people in there, you know, they got to interview, they got to be moving in that direction, they got to show evidence to that during that time, but.
I mean, I just don't, I can't understand whether you think that relatives are the criminals in this scenario, or whether you think the service provider, agency isn't capable of determining.
I'm gonna just say that it sounds like we've made a little progress. If we allow for a transition period of 30 days, and I think
Per episode.
per episode, yeah. And then, you know, you can always, again, as you point out, ask for the additional time. Does anybody have any serious concerns about that? Yes, ma'am.
What I'm hearing her say is quality of staff. She's saying that the brother is doing his work to monitor the staff.
Uh-huh.
So there's a quality of staff problem here that needs to be resolved. How it's resolved, if it's changing the definition or whatever, at some point in time, it needs to be addressed.
Well, so I think we have two issues here, and if there's a specific issue with that MCO and that staffing, that's an individual case that needs to be resolved, absolutely. As far as anything more significant and a change to this definition, I don't think we're going to accomplish that in this cycle.
Well, I'm saying that I'm here because one of the...
Well, then you're right, because she's just not going to move out under this waiver.
...is a problem. And one of the things, like within Mecklenburg and my group, what we're asking a couple of parents is, can we look at quality of staff, have a committee formed to truly see what's happening, because we're experiencing a poor quality of staff and we don't have anybody to talk to about it.
Right, and well, so there's a couple of responses that I would make to that. I don't know if you're in Mecklenburg or Cardinal wants to say something.
Oh, no, they don't.
I would be happy to talk to you after the meeting. I work for Cardinal Innovation.
Yeah.
I would love to talk to you more about
But
how we can support you.
Bigger picture, I think that is something, again, I mean, it's progress, not perfection. I mean, so like, for instance, they're trying to do away with accreditation, and that might be, or not with accreditation, so having accreditation replace certain monitoring requirements. In this recent round of legislation, I said that backwards, but
Not so much.
not so much.
No, that's not what the reform section says.
Yeah,
Well,
one of the other things that's happening too is that you have places like Walmart, like fast food places, that are increasing their rates. And what we're having now is that we're getting people who this is a job to, instead of a career. When you have people who worked with our loved ones and this was a career to them, you had very good quality. And now you're not getting that because it's a job.
Well,
How do we, as a group, change that dynamic so that people feel like this is a career for them?
Well, there's a group working on creating an association of direct support professionals in the state of North Carolina.
Pick up Deanna.
So I would.
Like who's benchmarking?
I would say, yeah, and I would say that would probably be the first place to look as far as how to support that. Because the fact is that it's a job for people because it doesn't pay well enough and it's not, it's no way to support a family of their own right now. So most people get out of that part of the business even if they love it. So benchmarks and that group is who to look to support that and try to help it move forward.
Well, also relevant to this is the fact that you've eliminated the level 1 incident reports for backup staffing. That's vanished out of this waiver amendment.
The level 1 incidents, that has to do with the level 1 incidents not being the QM11 and being able to waive that on the providers keep it on site. We have talked to the standardization group about submitting a spreadsheet biweekly to the MCO. If there are problems, the care coordinator should know that there is no staff in there.
But if you aren't getting DMA, aren't getting the level 1 incident reports from all of the LME MCOs quarterly, I think they're supposed to be submitted on backup staffing, then how are you aware that backup staffing isn't being provided? And part of the reason backup staffing isn't being provided is because of the quality of staff that is supposedly offered as backup staff. But it's been eliminated out of this waiver, out of the amendment. Whatever, and it's whatever section that is about incident reports, Appendix GHI, I'm not sure.
So if I could just interject right here. So the reality of backup staff is what provider can afford to have people on a retainer waiting to go out and somebody else is out. And the payment methodologies and things like that, we don't support the demand to do that because who can sit around waiting on somebody to be out? That's a challenge in implementing that at the provider level, I think. I'm not sure why the providers aren't screaming from the rafters on this particular topic of backup staff because it's an unreasonable expectation that's not funded. And that's a problem, number one. But there is the other sort of thing I would say, and this goes to the thing I said earlier that I don't want to talk about, I'm not trying to bring up in this meeting, is when you look at the relatives as a provider, it is a sustainable workforce. It is a workforce that is there and will be there and for all time, adults and children. And as the population ages and there is more demand on the CNA level staff in our world because of the baby boomers who have an opportunity to work with an elderly person that maybe they just sit there all day and text on their phone and look at TV with versus somebody that you're actually asking for active skill building.
Yeah.
Our population, covered by the Innovations Waiver, has a huge potential to be without staff at all as that population continues to age and that workforce moves in that direction. It's one of the number one reasons to start looking at technological solutions for people as well as relatives as a provider as a sustainable workforce for the population. So I had the opportunity to talk to some people who are very innovative about that in some other states in recent years and who don't have the same position about relatives as providers, because it is in that state for children and adults, as North Carolina has chosen. So, whether we go there or don't go there, what the values are, aren't about that. I do think when you get into this workforce issue, why can't you find a staff? Is it really, that they aren't out there? And in some markets, they're not out there. Everywhere isn't Raleigh.
Yeah.
And in some communities, those people don't exist. They're serving the aging population.
Here, here.
And I don't think that, okay, so, and I don't think that, I'm certainly not disagreeing with you. I'm simply saying that we're going to have this conversation again in less than 2 years, as we discussed. So for today, for these comments, and for the purpose of moving this process along, I think we've kind of discussed that, and the backup staff staffing seems like it's something everyone, the 30 days, okay, so, other than that, do you have any other major comments that you?
So it's going to remain out of Appendix G, participant safeguards. The backup, level 1 incident report, backup staffing, that's removed from Appendix G.
It says that backup staffing will be reported, it's not in there. We have been working with the standardization group on a bi-weekly sheet to the MCO outlining what the issues are. That's more in line with what IRIS, the state reporting system, has gone to. And that's what will be put in the policy.
But we'll still know. We'll still know.
It'll just be in a different way
It's not an issue of not reporting it, it's an
than
issue
historically.
of the manner.
So I'm gonna go, okay. So it's actually less administrative burden with the same result of reporting, is what you're saying. Okay. So any other comments?
So it's not a participant safeguard, it's an administrative burden. Got ya.
Sir, and then Ellen.
Backing up to the community navigator.
Just wanted to be clear. It's not a participant safeguard, it's an administrative burden.
Ended, or are you okay with 30 days authorization? Community navigator.
That was for the B3s. So this would not be 30 days for the waiver.
No, that's an education issue.
And then psychiatry for the crisis supports.
Education. It
Doesn't mandate it.
doesn't mandate that it be someone on staff.
It takes forever for my provider to find backup staff. If for instance, Lynn calls out sick that the day of, and I'm without staff. They can't find staff last minute.
The unfortunate thing is that I think this is a much larger issue, and that's why I was talking about supporting benchmarks and the association of DSPs, because the fact of the matter is that part of the reason why they can't find backup staffing is because nobody's there to actually provide the backup staffing. The reason why nobody's there to provide the backup staffing is because the actual direct support professionals and the whole industry is not compensated in such a way that it's an attractive career. It's the same problem that they're having currently with the education system and substitute teachers. And if you want to look at why that's a problem, then you need to look at the legislature and look at what's going into the state budget and what's going out of the state budget, and what the issues of importance are for those people, because they're the ones that are ultimately responsible for a lot of the problems that we're experiencing.
I just had that conversation with one of my supervisory staff in the Raleigh area yesterday, and you're right on spot, that we are losing staff more and more because they are getting paid to have full-time jobs better at other places than what we're able to pay them. So now we become part-time job, we become the backup job to the full-time.
Yeah, and that's not a waiver issue.
Right, that's right, exactly. So, and it is an issue, and I don't mean to take away from that, but I think we've kind of talked about what we can do and what's within the context of this group. So, one more time, and then we can take a break and come back to communications. You want to tell us the next steps, Deb? One more time, any other comments or questions about what we talked about so far today?
Out of the 700 comments,
Those were the highlights that couldn't be.
Or the ones that the answer wasn't pretty much, yeah.
Oh, and the only other thing is there are apparently workforce competencies from CMS. There's for DSPs, I think those need to be a little more emphasized.
And I think that's going to be another conversation for the.
Because if you do that, there's going to be rate
Exactly.
implications associated, so.
And that's another part of what the NCA DSP would theoretically be doing.
So.
I just want to
Oh,
add,
no, it's
I
totally,
think I
but
need
that's
you,
the
so
next.
what's your next steps with
The
this,
next step
with this process?
is making all of the corrections that are in the waiver document, and then getting feedback from probably Dr. Henley to determine whether anything rises to the level of reposting, and then
Which I
submitting.
don't think it does. And then submitting to CMS, and then we'll wait for their feedback. So that's the next steps with this process. And once this process, once this waiver submission process is where it's at, the next steps for the state's part are going to really focus on training and communication. So a lot of the things that we were discussing, the care coordination, FCO training, and so on, those are going to be the next steps for that. So we can take this 10 minutes and go to the bathroom or whatever, and then we'll talk a little bit about what that ongoing communication plan looks like right now, and what we think we need to do with it, if that's okay.